Welcome to the Evangelism Podcast. I'm Daniel King, and I'm very excited to have one of my good friends from Canada with me, Finu Iype. Thank you so much for joining me on the Evangelism Podcast.
Daniel, I am so thrilled, super honored to be on the podcast with you. I'm so grateful for our friendship and for everything God's doing through King Ministries International. And just love what you and Jessica are all about and your family. And great to be on the show today.
Finu, you've had a tremendous impact on Canada, helping the churches of Canada, and you've also done a lot of ministry in other nations around the world. But let's start at the beginning. When you were 15 years old, you saw a vision of people falling into a lake of fire. Can you tell me about that vision and how it impacted your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So, quick backstory. I grew up, my parents are originally from South India. I was born and raised in a little island in the Middle East called the Kingdom of Bahrain. And my parents were believers. My mom was second generation. Her dad was a Brahmin Hindu who came to Jesus through a vision of Jesus, actually. And then my dad was first generation, evangelical, born again, baptized Christian. They were previously Orthodox nominal Christians back in India. So grew up in a Christian home and had the call of God on my life from when I was really young. Actually, I think it was 10 years old when I had the first person that I can remember pray for me and basically give me a prophetic word and say God's going to use me around the world to preach the gospel. And it's the last thing I wanted to do, Daniel. Honestly, it wasn't like yes, I got this prophetic word. It was like no, I don't want to do this. This is the last thing I want to do because our context at the time was we were in the Middle East and all these pastors and ministry leaders would come from India to raise money, because the Middle East is obviously more prosperous. And so they would come to raise funds. And so that was my context of what ministry was going to look like. And I didn't want anything to do with it. And then when I was about 12 or 13, I had this skin condition on my face that broke out where literally all of my face, I mean, your audience can't see me, but like I said, I'm from India, so my skin is brown, but my face, Daniel, looked sort of like your face. It was white, like it just all over. The skin on my face was peeling off. I went through a really rough time. You can imagine going to high school, brown kid with white patches all over his face. So went to the best doctors we could in Bahrain at the time. Went to the American Mission Hospital, which was the best. And I mean, the dermatologist there, after 2 years of treatment, said to me, "Finu, I really don't know what to do. Like I've tried everything. The only other option is to do a biopsy of your skin on your face, but that's most likely going to leave a scar on your face for the rest of your life. So you need to think about this." So I go home and I'm completely devastated, 15 years old, Daniel. And I'm like, God, I don't understand. Why do I have to go through this? None of my friends, even, people that don't know Jesus don't seemingly are not struggling with anything like this. So why me? And I'm praying and I'm just crying out to God one night. And all of a sudden I see this vision. And in the vision, it's like hundreds of thousands of people are walking to the edge of a cliff, like almost like zombies, like they don't know what's really going on. They're not connected to reality. They're just sort of following the crowd kind of deal. And then when they get to the edge of the cliff, they're actually going to fall over into this lake of fire. And until they get to the last row, they don't realize that's what's going to happen. At that point, I could literally see their faces, the horrified look on their faces, and they're trying to pull back, but they can't. And so they basically get pushed over the edge. And I can hear their screams, and I'm crying, and I am weeping. I'm like, somebody, this thing is so real to me. It's a vision, obviously. It's not real, but it's so real that I'm like physically just weeping for these people. And I'm saying, somebody tell them. This is literally what I'm saying out loud. Somebody tell them. And Daniel, I've been a Christian for, most of my life at that point. I gave my life to Jesus when I was 7, baptized when I was 12, being a part of a church the whole time. And I'd never thought about souls. Like I'd never thought about another person other than me. We grew up in a very traditional Indian church where it was like, we would do, like, our pastors would wear white only for the most part. The women in our churches would not wear for the most part, no makeup, no ornaments, no jewelry, nothing like that. Like, it was very like traditional, legalistic kind of. And so the concept, even though I don't think I ever heard anyone say it out loud, the underlying philosophy of what it meant to be a Christian was, we are people that have made sacrifices and lived differently from the world. So we're going to go to heaven and the world's going to go to hell, and you need to stay away from the world. That was the sort of thinking. And so never even thought about, hey, wait a minute, we live in a Muslim nation. Like, we live with Arabs all around us. Like, these people need Jesus. In fact, I half jokingly, but it's true, say, we would, Indian people, we love to pray, okay? Sort of like the Africans in that sense. Like, we're always praying. Like, we had prayer meetings every day of the week. We had all night prayers, fasting prayers, 24-hour chain prayer meetings, right? Constant prayer. I don't remember one prayer meeting ever that I lived there for 17 years that was called to pray for Bahrain, like pray for the people of this nation. So I share that context to tell you that this vision is so out of the ordinary. I've never experienced anything like it. And for the first time in my life, I'm actually thinking about souls. And that night, the Lord spoke to me, Daniel, and he said to me, your life belongs to me. See, when I was, from when I was 10 to that point when I was 15, my mom would always remind me about all these, sort of prophetic words. Like, anyone that with any kind of a prophetic gift that would come to our church would basically say, you're gonna travel the world, you're gonna preach the gospel, right? And I'd always say to my mom, I'll never do it. I'd say, my life belongs to me, and I'm going to decide what I'm going to do with my life. So that night, the Lord speaks to me and says, your life belongs to me, and I surrender my life. So if you ask me, when was the moment you surrendered the rest of your life to preaching the gospel and doing what God's called you to do, it would be that day, December 7th, 2000. I was 15 years old, and that was the moment.
Wow. And so you launched out into ministry. Share with me some of the history of your ministry and what you've done since that moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's a loaded question and could be a pretty long answer, so I'll try to keep it short. So anyways, I mean, I guess after the vision, I'm 15, I surrender my life to ministry. The Lord ends up, so I end up not going back to the doctors or, taking the medication, because there were all these side effects. And I said, if God really spoke to me, then I'm going to trust him to heal me. So I know that this is really God's plan for my life. So a year later, pastor comes to our home, prays for some oil, asked me to apply it on my face, just regular cooking oil, not like, olive oil from Israel or any of that fancy stuff, just like zero cholesterol canola oil kind of thing, and he just prays for it. And he's like, Finu, I believe God's going to heal you. And I just need you to put this in your face for a week and see what happens. And sure enough, I was totally healed. And I went through another very major healing experience. I don't want to take time to talk about that right now, but so after that, at the age of 17, through a series of what I can only say are God opportunities and doors that opened up, I moved to Canada, Toronto, to go to Bible college when I was 18. And my heart was, I want to preach the gospel, because I had multiple sort of words from the Lord that said I would go to Canada. This is before Canada was ever even part of the conversation, as far as going to Bible college. In fact, it's funny. One of the opportunities I had was at Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, where you are, because we had someone related to our family that worked on staff there. And so they had reached out and said, hey, I know you want to go into ministry, is ORU something you'd consider? And I would have loved to, but when I prayed, I sensed that that wasn't the direction, and Canada was the direction. So the Lord had said to me, from Canada, you're going to go around the world. And so I got here at 18, and right away I was like, I got to preach the gospel, and I got to let people know, and that kind of thing. And it was hard, because a lot of the people I went to school with were not necessarily, there yet. They weren't there to let's get a team together, let's go out. And so I think it was when I was 19 or so, I connected with a person that ended up being my mentor. Was a pastor at the time. I think he was in his 60s, had been with the PAOC, which is basically the Assemblies of God in Canada. And said, you know what, Finu, I really sense that the hand of the Lord is on you for evangelism, and I want to help set things up for you. So basically, from when I was 19, Daniel, I would go into like all these rural towns, right? So outside of the Toronto area, talk to pastors, like cold call them, door knock, right? And it was tough. Like, I'm a brown kid from a country called Bahrain that no one's heard about, with a name like Finu Iype that most people can't pronounce until the fifth or sixth try. And, I'm like, I'm showing up to town saying, I want to be the evangelist for you guys. And I want to bring the Alliance Church and the Pentecostal Church and the Baptist Church all together, rent out a ballroom in a hotel and preach the gospel, and it's hilarious because I feel sad in some sense, or sorry for the people that were in those initial meetings, because I don't even think they could probably fully understand everything I was saying because of my accent, like in the Indian most Indians, if you've ever come across somebody that grew up in India or grew up in an Indian family, we struggle with certain words and certain pronunciations. So the one that I always struggled with, which is sort of universal for people, I guess, from an Indian background, is V's and W's, right? So I'd keep saying the window is open, you know what I'm saying? And so John would always, my mentor would always say, Finu, it's window, not bendo, you know what I'm saying? So I'd constantly have to like be trained even in my speech. But Daniel, when I think back of that, I haven't even talked about this in so long, so it's refreshing just going back to these memories. What stands out to me is passion. Like I wasn't probably the best communicator, bro, and I was in second year of Bible college. Like, I was new to Canada, so probably there wasn't a lot of cultural contextualization going on or any of that. But it was like, for me, it was like I'd experienced something and I wanted other people to experience the same thing. Like, I had experienced Jesus. I'd experienced his power, his healing power. I'd experienced the presence of Jesus. I'd experienced forgiveness of sins. I'd experienced the reality of, hey, we're going to a Christless eternity without faith in Jesus, eternity away from God, eternity in hell. And I want people to know that there is an answer, there is a solution. His name is Jesus. And if you put your trust in him, not your works, but if you put your trust in him, he will save you and he will transform your life. And that was it. Like, it was passion, like money. Like, I had been, Daniel, I talk about this all the time. People complain about, no one's paying me a salary. I'm like, I didn't go shopping when I moved to Canada for the first maybe 4 years, 3 or 4 years. Like, it was ridiculous. Okay. I was wearing the same stuff. All my initial suits. Okay. So back in the day, I'm sorry to say this, but I wore a lot of suits and ties because part of, how we were trained in ministry, you sort of dress the part.
Can't be anointed unless you have the right suit on.
That's right. And bro,
and if you can embroider your logo on it, even better.
No, I didn't get that far. We didn't raise that much money, right, for the gold embroidery. But yeah, my suits were all hand-me-downs. It was just people would just say, hey, Finu, I have this old suit that I want to give away. Do you want it? And that's my suit. So it didn't matter. I didn't have the funds to do it. And literally every meeting, it was like, God, I just pray that you would provide, that the money will come in the offering, or a business person in that town would write a check for us or whatever. And I remember we were turning over probably dollars in the thousands, and my salary a month at the time was $100. I mean, I lived with family, so that helped. I had some relatives in Toronto area at the time, but yeah, $100. I mean, probably buy me coffee for the month, but that was it. So no shopping, no expenses, but the ministry was growing a lot faster because I was like, I just want to go preach the gospel. And yeah, man, that was where I learned. That's where I learned to figure it out and do it at 19 and 20 in small town Ontario, and just with pastors who were very generous. I mean, when I think back on these guys, bro, I am so grateful that they gave me a chance, because I just think of being in their position now. I'm like, wow, like they definitely either they heard from God or they just felt bad for me. They just couldn't say no to this kid who really believed that God could use him.
Well, thank God that he can use anybody. And you have grown a lot in the Lord since those days. And one of the things I really like about you is you are a strategic thinker. You like thinking about how churches can be effective at reaching people. You like helping churches, coaching churches. Talk to me some about how you help churches develop missional thinking.
Okay, so let me also share with you a little bit about the journey that got me there. Because initially, I wasn't thinking that way at all. So my model, Daniel, at Passion to Reach Ministries was Crusade evangelism, right? So which is, I mean, you're obviously not just familiar with it, you're probably, one of the experts when it comes to Crusade evangelism
I did my
internationally. So
doctorate of ministry on mass evangelism, so I'm
there
probably
you go. So,
two or three.
I did not do a doctorate on that,
Yeah.
but I mean, I just figured it out on the go. And so initially, the first about 7 years of my ministry, from when I was 20 to about 27, was international evangelism and crusades, and we did about 20 nations around the world in that period of time, and that was my heart, and I loved it. I loved doing that. And as you know, in Africa or India and South America, there's so much opportunity for this. People actually respond to an event that happens in town because they're just curious. They want to know what's going on, and so it's a great way to reach a lot of people at one time. One of the things I struggled with in those days was in that season of crusade evangelism was the follow-up. Like so we, just like I'm sure you do, and most ministries that do mass crusades do, we had a whole workbook, like we had a whole template and a whole crusade manual and training for follow-up, and decision cards, and timelines for churches, and all of that was built into the crusade. And so we did our best when it came to due diligence with making sure these people that came up front and made a commitment and signed a card were followed up with. But what I found was, even with all of that prep work that we did, the culture of the church wasn't always the right culture to accept and embrace new people. And what I sort of related to is, it's like an organ donation, right? When you have an organ donor, and if you have a kidney given or whatever it is, you generally need to take, I forget the exact terminology for it right now, but it's like rejection drugs or something like that, because your body basically rejects the organ because it says it's not part of this body, and so you have to take these drugs forever, so your body doesn't do that. And that's what it felt like. It was like, yeah, they had all the systems, they had all the tools, but because this guy was the drunk in town, and he just didn't have a home, and he didn't dress right, and he didn't talk right, and his half his teeth were not there, or whatever it was, he was just so radically different from that group of Christians in that church. Even though they had all the systems, they weren't embracing this person. And so that's where the seed of this thinking started. I was like, God, I love this part of the ministry. I love the crusade part of it. I love calling people to faith, but I also care so deeply about what happens to them, and sometimes this is the trap that, and this is an evangelism podcast, so I can talk about this. This is a trap that us evangelists fall into, right? I have friends who will say to me, oh yeah, I got 20 Muslims saved last week. I'm like, wow, that's phenomenal. 20 months, like I've never heard of that. I'm like, where, I'd love to talk to them. I'd love to talk to, like, how they, oh, I don't know where they are. Like, I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what? Oh, you know what? I just asked them, do you want to pray? And I just led them in the sinner's prayer and gave them a New Testament and said, just go read this. And I just left it. And I didn't get the information. I didn't do any. I'm like, that's interesting. I'm not knocking it. I'm not saying that giving that Bible, saying that prayer doesn't matter. I mean, that's a great thing to do. That's a great first step. But it's like, is that really what it means to lead somebody into a relationship with Jesus, for saving faith to be formed in their hearts? I question that, and so that's sort of where it started for me, was like, okay, how do we help churches think missionally? That we exist as an organization to constantly incorporate new people into faith in Jesus and into the body of Christ, and help them figure that out. So part of the transition process was about 7 years ago now. God was really speaking to me about Canada. And so when I was 17, Daniel, before I moved to Canada, I was praying one night and had a vision. And in the vision, I saw explosions of fire from the east coast to the west coast of Canada. And the Lord said to me, at that point, at 17, never been to Canada, didn't actually know much about, globally, people know more about the US than they know about Canada. they assume Canada is similar, but they don't really know a lot of details about Canada. So I didn't know much about Canada. And but the Lord said to me, you're going to be a part of something that's going to reach the nation. Like, you're going to reach Canada. And so that was my heart. And I felt I had landed, I think, from a Crusade in Africa, came to Toronto to Pearson Airport. And I was like, I'm looking around me, and I'm thinking, the same people I'm preaching to there are here. I don't know if you know this, if your listeners know this, but Toronto is one of the most multicultural, diverse cities in North America, maybe even in the world. Okay, so we've got people from every country you can imagine living here and working here and raising their families here. And I was like, I'd love to do something about it. But my challenge was, no one seemed to want an evangelist to come in to do a 3-day evangelistic revival. You know what I mean? It sounded so old school. None of the churches that I was connected to in the GTA were wanting, the Greater Toronto area were wanting to do something like that. So I was like, God, I don't even know where I fit. I feel rejected as a person, as a Christian with an evangelistic gift. I feel rejected by the organized sort of church structures. And so I had a conversation with, at the time was my pastor, my church. And I said, I really want to test this out. I feel like an evangelist can also be an equipper. And that conversation led to working with that church for a couple of years. And we saw tremendous growth. I mean, within the first 6 months, I think we had like 50 salvations and 30 baptisms, which was like phenomenal, record breaking. Yeah. I mean, the church was about 250, 300 people at the time, probably. And so that led to what this could actually work. And so we started doing, I was doing 2 weeks out doing crusades in different parts of the world, and then 2 weeks in working with the church as an equipper, helping them figure out how to reach their community. So after about 2 years of that, where we had about 100-ish, 120, 130 people come to faith, 70, 75 baptisms, we said, okay, this could actually be something that many churches can take advantage of and learn from. And so I had pastors asking me all the time, Finu, what are you doing? How is this happening at a local church? No crusade, no guest speaker coming in, nothing fancy, nothing out of the ordinary, just working within the culture of the church to change the way people think, they change the way leadership thinks, and change the structure of the church to be missional. And so that led to about 5 years of consulting and coaching with churches on how to do that. So coming back to your question, and I give that context to say, it wasn't like I just sat down in my office one day and came up with this grand idea of how do we get churches to be missional. It was more like, from my perspective, and this is probably different in the US, and definitely, I'm sure you different where you are, Daniel, in the southern part of the US, but in Canada, crusades don't work. Partly because churches don't want it, and partly because people just don't respond to another event in town. Like, it's just not the thing. So from my perspective, the best way for me as an evangelist to function in my context in the Toronto area was to be an equipper of churches and to help people figure out how to reach their community. So the biggest shift, I'll start here and you can sort of ask me specific questions if you'd like to, but the biggest shift is looking at your church as a missions sending organization. So just the same concept, the same thing you would do, like that a mission society, for instance, would do in finding Christians that have a heart for a nation, equipping them, training them, teaching them language, teaching them culture, teaching them all of that, and then sending them on the field and giving them support. A church needs to think that way. Like, one of the things I would say to churches all the time is, your community, like literally the people that live in your community are not the same people, none of the unique people that lived here when this church started 30 years ago. It's literally a whole new crop of people. So you keep saying, oh, we've evangelized the community, we've reached people, we've dropped off tracts at every door. I'm like, those were different people you dropped off tracts to. I mean, it's the same property, but different people. And in our context, like I said, because of the immigration, these are not even the same kind of people. They're different kinds of people that have different kinds of desires and needs and pain points and hopes. And it's like, how do you speak to them? And the average church bro had no clue. They hadn't even studied the community they were in to know what are the needs of this community. And that's one of the biggest challenges I faced was most churches want to do missions in their community based on what they like to do. And my point was, it doesn't matter what you like to do.
And
It
reaching
matters
people
what your
who look
community
like
needs.
them and talk like them and it- that are comfortable with them. And so it really takes a whole different paradigm of thinking to think the world is a mission field and right outside my door is a mission field. I need to think in a way that I can reach people.
And part of the challenge is, see, we celebrate, what we celebrate is what grows, Daniel, right? So we celebrate, oh, we got another new family that moved in from this part of town or whatever. They new to the community. They're great leaders. They've got a great job. He's a manager at a car dealership, or she's a manager at a local hospital or something. And we celebrate that, right? So we communicate constantly. We want well-to-do, put together families, mom and dad, 3 little beautiful kids, they're going to jump on the board. She's going to be the head of the Sunday school department. Like, this is what we want. We don't want the guy that doesn't look like us, doesn't eat what we eat, doesn't dress decent, doesn't have a job. He's actually right now, in between jobs and actually needs help from the church. Like, we don't celebrate that. We don't say, wow, we've got the family, they're in desperate need, church. We're going to rally around them. We're going to love them. It's not what we talk about from the pulpit. We don't celebrate in our annual reports. Sally, who is one of our church members, now has built relationships with 5 families that are non-Christians. And she goes out with all of their kids to the park once a week for a kids activity. No one talks, you don't even hear Sally's name mentioned, right? Because that's not what we celebrate. We celebrate the dollars, we celebrate new services, we celebrate the influential people we attract. And part of the thinking is we need to change the way we look at the scorecard in the North American church, right? It's not just about those externals. It's about, what are your people doing to build authentic relationships with people that are far from Jesus in your community? Find those stories. And in fact, if possible, find the stories that have not yet resulted in those people becoming Christians. Because when we constantly highlight only the stories where people become Christians, we are, not obviously, we're not saying this, but we are communicating that what matters is that you can close the deal.
Yeah, only the finish line matters. You're not
That's right.
celebrating the process.
That's right. So when you ask me what is missional thinking, how do you help churches figure this out, is that you celebrate engagement. That's what you celebrate. You celebrate people getting involved in people's lives, people caring for their local school systems, people giving to their local charities. Don't come up with your own, and this is the challenge we have, right? It's like, it's got to be our charity. There's an issue with the paint in our schools. Okay, instead of just helping the local charity that's helping repaint all of our schools, we start the Christian Assemblies of God or Christian, community church painting service. And it's like, because it's like, if it's not my thing, we don't want to do it. It's like, no, send your people into local existing charities so they can be part of the fabric of the community and start engaging in relationships with people that serve there and people that are served by them. That's the better strategy, instead of taking on the administrative responsibility of creating all these new programs and new projects, which, by the way, is why boards end up saying to lead pastors, nope, we're not doing another thing, because it's too much work. And I agree. But the point is, find the people that are doing it. Daniel, I'll give you this example. Like, at one point, we were doing these events called Cycle Fest. And it was basically like, we would do this event where people in our community would run, walk, cycle to raise money for community causes. So let's say a wing of our local hospital or whatever. But it wasn't like just church people. It was just community people as well. Part of that, what we would do is we would help give away bikes to kids that couldn't afford it. And I'll never forget this. I'll never forget this moment. We connected with a bunch of charities. And what these charities would do, Daniel, they would rent buses, like big school buses. They would pack these buses with families in the community, send them over on their dime, the organization's paying for it, so that these kids would get training on, because they've never ridden a bike. So we would bring in bike instructors, train them, fit them to the right bike, get them a helmet, all that stuff. And I remember the church being full of people, non-Christians, a lot of them Muslims, sitting in our church, waiting for their kids to get fitted and trained on how to ride a bike. And I'm thinking, I've done nothing. Literally, that event at that point was completely zero cost for the church. Because all we did was we went out to people and said, hey, we're doing this for this community. Would you like to partner with us? And they brought the people to us. We didn't even have to go looking for the people. Once they came to us, these people were like, who are you? Oh, we're a church. Really? Wow. And then we got to have amazing conversations, build relationships. And bro, we literally saw people come to faith in Jesus because of those kinds of events.
So talk me through the process of how you would help a church. Say you have a church, urban church, 200 people, they're doing normal church type things. How would you help that church to start thinking more strategically in how they're reaching people?
Well, the first step is I would, talk to the board and talk to the pastor, right? Here's what I believe. You can never duplicate or replicate what you don't live. So one of my first questions when I go to a board meeting was, when was the last time each of you shared your faith with someone that's not a Christian? And there'd be a long pause. So I'd say, we're not going to start doing anything with the church, the organization, the people, until we do something here. So to me, and I know that sounds like, whoa, bro, Rick, seriously, how's that going to work? But I've seen this time and time again, where I've deployed missional programs and structures and systems that would not take, going back to my analogy of the body rejecting it, it would not take. You know why? Because the leadership wasn't bought into it. And the only way the leadership will be bought into it is when they actually begin to live it. So we worked with a model that my friend Kevin Harney in California, Shoreline Church, came up with he wrote a book called Organic Outreach, and I really loved it. And part of his simple concept was hold the leadership of the church accountable to having gospel conversations once a month. And so that's literally where we would start. If I was to work with the church today, that's where I would start. I'd say for the first 3 months or the first 6 months, I'd say to the pastor, I don't even want your people to know that we're working on anything. I just want your board and your leaders of your departments to know that we're working on it, because we're going to meet with them once or twice a month. And again, going back to Kevin's strategy, what I love about it is he doesn't reward the finish line. He doesn't reward in his system that you have to lead someone to faith in Jesus. That's not the point. The point is, are you engaging? Did you go out with a friend at work and have a gospel conversation? Did you just share your faith? Did you share your testimony? Did you ask them questions to learn more about them? Like, what steps are you taking to get to know unsaved people, non-Christians in your community? Because here's the thing. What I found is this: when leaders start to have friends, and I want to use that word very strong, friends, not acquaintances, not, oh, I know the guy down the street. No, friends who are Muslims and Hindus and atheists, that begins to change the way they look at their own leadership in their church, because it informs them to say, wow, that event is so exclusive sounding. Like, that sounds like my friend now, I don't know, if he's a Hindu, maybe his name is Krishna, or if he's a Muslim, his name is Abdullah, or maybe it's Scott that grew up, in a Presbyterian church and had a horrible experience. It's like, I don't believe in God. I don't believe any of this stuff is real. Whatever your friend's name is, right? It's like, will Scott feel comfortable in this environment? And if not, then why are we doing this as a church if it's not going to help them? But here's my point. If I did that without working with the leadership first, what happens is the leaders say, well, no, we've always done an event like this way. And I'm like, guys, but it won't work. You won't reach anyone doing it that way, obviously, because the results, sort of prove it, but it's hard to convince them until they have personal friendships and relationships with those people. So again, I know I'm giving you a lot of detail here, but I would say first step, Daniel, is, and I think if you're an evangelistic person, that's an equipper. And by the way, Daniel, one of my passions is, and I don't even know how to do it. Maybe you can come up with a strategy for this because you're good with this kind of stuff. Is like, I believe they are evangelistically gifted people, not full-time evangelists, professional evangelists, crusade evangelists. I'm talking about just the gifting, the fivefold gifting of the evangelist. I believe that's there in all of our churches. And it's like, how do we recognize that gift and allow that person to be an equipper? So if you wanted to be an equipper in your church and you're listening to this podcast right now, my advice to you is forget about doing an outreach event. Forget about going out and creating a big splash in the community. Don't even start there. Start with the people on your leadership teams. Let's get them talking and becoming friends with people that don't know Jesus. And then together, and this is the beauty of it, is once they do that, Daniel, the events and the programs and the structure and the change comes from the inside out versus trying to create it from the outside in, which is what most of us as evangelists try to do. It's like, we do this big event and we're like, well, we hope the leadership follows up. We hope they change the way they do things. Well, unfortunately, it just doesn't seem to always work well that way.
Let's talk about some of the changes, the recent changes in your ministry. You founded Passion to Reach and used that to help churches across Canada. And now you are moving over to a position with the Village Church there in the Greater Toronto area, and you want to reach out to skeptics, reach out to a post-Christian, postmodern world. What are some of the new initiatives that you're planning as you're looking to plant churches that can reach people in the Greater Toronto area?
Well, Daniel, firstly, let me start off saying this literally happened in the middle of the pandemic. So I just started this position in September. And unlike America, we were joking before we went live on the show that, America is obviously the land of the free and the home of the brave. We don't have a lot of freedom right now in Canada. So we're pretty much locked down in our homes. We haven't met as churches now for months. So a lot of what we're doing right now is just online and gathering people and connecting people. But yeah, the sort of the bigger, I guess, point to your question is Village Church, and part of what we're doing here, and the reason for the transition is, as much as I enjoyed helping churches with being on mission and figuring this out, the truth, Daniel, is it's very hard to make this happen. It's very hard to take a church that has operated a certain way for 30 years or 40 years. That, by the way, I want to be very careful that their methodologies were very effective and their communication was super relevant when they started, and maybe for the first 10 or 15 years that they started. It's just that the world around them has changed so much that they're not able to now connect. So helping them transition was a very difficult thing, doing it. And the Lord, in a very sort of supernatural, divine way, connected me with Village Church. And Village started 10 years ago with about 16 people. And now they have about 7 sites with somewhere between 8 to 10,000 people that call Village home. And they've done a really good job reaching skeptics. And I think they've about 1,500 to 1,800 baptisms in the last 10 years, which is amazing in Canada. And just so you, for context, for your listeners in America, that's not a big number. It's not a big church, but in Canada, it's like any church in the Greater Toronto area over 1,000 people would be considered a mega church here. So a significant growth. And so I'm really excited to be part of the team. And what we're really focusing on is, what does it look like to speak to people that are skeptics, that say, I don't believe in God, I'm done with religion, all of that. So right now, I'm basically looking for lead pastors in our Toronto area, church planters that we can equip and launch as soon as this pandemic is behind us, and start new churches. And to specifically answer your question, Pastor Mark Clark, who's the senior pastor of the church, has written a couple of books. The first one was called The Problem of God. It was a book for skeptics, 10 things that, skeptics would say we have an issue with when it comes to God. So science was an issue. Jesus is an issue. The Bible, its authenticity is an issue. I think one of the chapters is on sex and the biblical idea of sexuality. So all of these things that people would say, I don't really believe in Jesus, or I want to be a Christian because of these reasons. He sort of addressed them, and he just came out with a new book called The Problem of Jesus, which basically talks about who is Jesus and did Jesus actually exist, which a lot of people in our culture are like, oh, that's a fable. And it's like, no, there's actually extra biblical proof of the historical person of Jesus that lived, at the timeline that the Bible tells us he lived. So, that's part of how we do it is we use philosophy, and we use science, and we use poetry, and we use human connection to talk about why the Bible is practical, why the Bible is real, why the Bible speaks the truth, why the gospel applies to us today. And yeah, I mean, it's obviously been super effective in British Columbia, which is on the West Coast, and we're really excited to see churches planted right through this province, and I'm in Ontario right now. Over the next few years.
I think you are on exactly the right path. I've been very concerned about this area of ministry for a while now, especially asking the question, how do we reach America with the gospel? Like you said, the traditional crusade evangelism has limited effectiveness here in the United States. I mean, it still works great in Ethiopia. People will walk 3 days to come to a service, but here in America, no one will walk 3 minutes to go anywhere. And so how do you reach them? So I just finished writing a book called Proof God is Real, and it's an apologetics book looking at different ways that we can know that God is real. And I want to reach skeptics. I noticed that on Twitter and on YouTube, there is a very active atheist community that is actively uh, talking to people about atheism. One of the most popular YouTube guys is a Canadian who does videos every week talking about why there is no God. And I said, the church needs to be in that arena. And so in our ministry, we're starting to look at how we can produce material and reach out to skeptics and talk to them. And I've even reached out and befriended some atheists here in my area to start talking to them, just to be able to answer the questions that they're asking. And so I think you're right on the right path, reaching skeptics, reaching this post-Christian, postmodern world. The techniques and the methods that churches have used 30 years ago aren't going to work today. So I think you're doing the right thing.
And can I also say this, Daniel, that I also believe that the Holy Spirit, like I see every church that I follow that is trying to reach people with the gospel in our context is relying more and more on understanding Holy Spirit and how Holy Spirit works, and asking the Holy Spirit to to guide them in the process. I think the times where churches said, oh, if we just have a great marketing strategy, if we just have a great facility, if we just have a great kids program, that's the way to evangelize. And I think we're seeing that experiment has basically failed, because you may create fans of your organization and your leadership and your preaching style and your decor and your whatever design sense and all of that. So meaning people like to be in your space and they don't mind coming on a Sunday for an hour and being there and grabbing a coffee in your cafe after and on their way out. But it doesn't really do a good job of making disciples. And so part of what I just want to encourage everyone is listen to what the Holy Spirit is saying. Sometimes it's not just the North American, presentation that is going to do it. And this is where, and I say this because you just mentioned, Crusade's work in Ethiopia, but I think what also we need to look at in our model of what is working in the nations of the world, in places like Africa, is the power of God. Like when people experience the power of God, when people experience the presence of the Holy Spirit. I mean, I love apologetics, and we just talked about apologetics, but I don't necessarily believe I can convince somebody into the faith. I don't believe I can just reason with them and they basically say, you know what, you won the debate. I'm going to be a Christian and I'm going to live my life for Jesus. I don't really think that works.
Really
I
hard
think
to
you can
argue someone into belief.
Yeah, I think it helps them to open their mind to want to learn. It does. When you answer some of their sort of top questions, it opens their heart to say, you know what, I should actually, because some of these things that I thought were true obviously don't seem as true anymore. So I need to learn more, and it opens them up. So it has its place. But ultimately, it is the gospel is a power of God to salvation, and the presence of God that is released when you just communicate the simple truth of the gospel. You don't need to be on a platform in Africa. You don't need to be holding a microphone with a massive PA system. You could just literally be sitting with someone across, the table at a coffee shop, just literally sharing what the message of the gospel is, and the Spirit of God is able to work in that moment and transform the person's heart. So I'd just say that. I'd say a lot of prayer, a lot of fasting, a lot of prayer, a lot of reliance on the Holy Spirit is what we need today to reach this culture that we live in.
Amen. Finu, thank you so much for being on the Evangelism Podcast. It's a great honor to have such a smart person, such a strategic thinker on the program. I really appreciate you and the insights that God has given you. And I believe God has amazing things coming in the years to come for you.
Daniel, thank you so much. I've enjoyed, obviously, getting to know you over the past few years and your ministry. You're doing a fantastic job. Thank you for taking the initiative, I guess through the pandemic, to create this podcast and encourage people. And if you're listening right now, I just want to really encourage you, connect with Daniel, his ministry, get his books, because this guy knows what he's talking about. What I love about you, Daniel, is you don't just do it. You actually want to multiply your impact through your teaching, through your books, through the media stuff that you're doing. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for being an encouragement and an inspiration for so many of us that want to see people come to faith in Jesus.
Thank you. Bless you.
Daniel King is on a mission to save 1 million souls a year, but he can't do it alone. Would you consider sowing a financial seed today? To give, please visit www.kingministries.com.